Well, thank you, Penny, and thank you, University, for having us tonight. Thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to share some hopefully productive discussion tonight. There was one thing you did leave off my resume, and that is when I was in my last 2 years of high school, my first paying job, well actually it was really in college, my first paying job was promoting Twinkies at the local supermarket, and I had to wear yellow tights and a huge Twinkie the Kid costume, walking up and down the food aisle saying, do you know that Twinkies are now individually wrapped for freshness? So that I now am a spokesperson for local foods shows how far anybody can come. So what I'm going to talk to tonight is a vision for achieving prosperity in communities that I've been working on and many people around the world have been working on. I think one starting place is the observation that we kind of have a practice of economic development going on worldwide, which is fast becoming obsolete. And that economic development philosophy can be summarized in 3 words: attract and retain. This is the mantra of most economic developers, that our mission is to attract and retain business, attract and retain. What's odd about this formulation is that you cannot attract a local business. It's a total oxymoron. And if the only way you retain a local business is by paying it some kind of bribe, how local are those roots anyway? So it has become clear to me that economic development as usual has nothing to do with local businesses. And if we want an economic development that's supporting the things that we really care about and ought to be caring about, then we have to fundamentally reinvent the field. So in my view, a reinvention of economic development would focus on 3 basic principles. The first is to maximize the percentage of jobs in your community in locally owned business. The second is to maximize local self-reliance. And the third is to identify and spread triple bottom line businesses, businesses that are attentive not only to profit, but also doing well environmentally and with their labor standards. So if I can, I'd like to explain a little bit of the thinking behind these 3 principles, and then gradually move into an agenda around how to put our money into the businesses that can. First rule, again, is maximizing local ownership. Ownership matters. And the reason is local businesses spend more of their money locally. And this has an impact on what economists call the multiplier effect. So a really good example of this comes from a study done in Austin, Texas, about 10 years ago, looking at the relative impact of $100 spent at a non-local Borders bookstore. Borders is a chain that recently went out of business, and $100 spent at a local bookstore called Book People. $100 spent at the Borders left $13 in the local economy. $100 spent at the local bookstore left $45. So roughly speaking, buy the same bookstore, the same book at the same price at the local bookstore, and you get 3 times the jobs, 3 times the income and the wealth effects, 3 times the tax collections, 3 times the charitable contributions. We're not talking about a small difference. Why is there this difference? Well, Borders did not have a high-level management team on the ground. The local bookstore did. The Borders did not use local lawyers and accountants and business services. The local bookstore did. The Borders did not advertise on local radio and TV. The local bookstore did. The Borders did not have a stream of markets coming into the community. The local bookstore did. So just those 4 line items could easily be 15, 20, 25% of the spending of a local business. If I could generalize from that, if I have 2 similar businesses, one locally owned, one not locally owned, it would be very unusual to get a higher multiplier impact from the non-local business. And in point of fact, there have been about 24 studies done in the last 10 years since the Austin study, half in the United States, half internationally, and they all show that for every dollar you choose to spend in the local versus the non-local business, you will generate 2 to 4 times the jobs and economic development impacts in your community. And there is not a single study that has shown otherwise. But don't take my word for it. This is from the Harvard Business Review, summer of 2010. The title says, more small firms means more jobs. The Harvard professors who did this, Harvard B School professors, analyzed 200 metro areas in the United States. And what they found is that per capita job growth correlated with the presence of small business. Another study that was done in Penn State a few months after that found that per capita income growth also correlated with the presence of local small business. There's a mountain of evidence out there that I don't have time to go through. There's evidence that local businesses are key for creating walkable communities, smart growth. The reason being, you cannot create a walkable community in a big, multinational shopping mall. It just spatially doesn't work. If you're interested in tourism, tourists are attracted to the specialty and the uniqueness of local businesses. Local businesses generate entrepreneurship. We have emerging public health literature in the United States that shows that small business communities actually have better statistics on public health. We have a sociology literature that shows that small business communities have greater degrees of social equality. And we have a political science literature that shows that small business communities have higher rates of voting participation and higher rates of volunteerism. So it's a really overwhelming case for why we should be prioritizing locally owned businesses for economic development. Rule number 2, maximizing local self-reliance. Now, this runs against the grain of conventional economic development thinking that says, just focus on trade. So let's think about this reasonably. If you're a community, you will prosper if you sell as much stuff as possible locally and as much stuff as possible globally. Local, global, that's the whole thing. And you take one away, you're going to miss something. The assumption of economic development is that if you just focus on the global side of the picture, the local side takes care of itself. And in point of fact, what we know is the causality works in exactly the opposite direction. That if you focus on local businesses with local markets, many of them naturally start to grow into more powerful businesses looking regionally and globally, and they don't need subsidies in order to get there. I want to give you a couple of examples of communities that became wealthy through self-reliance. This slide here comes from the International Herald Tribune a couple of years ago. It's the story of Goosing. Goosing is an Austrian town with 3,000 people. Its economy historically had been rooted in agriculture and forestry. As the European community opened up in the 1980s and 1990s, Goosing was losing a lot of its competitiveness. They elected a mayor in 1995 who took the position that our salvation lies in becoming self-reliant in something. So they decided to focus on energy. they decided to begin with creating a district heating system around some of the buildings in Goosing. And they used wood from the old forestry industry to power that cogeneration. Well, once they created the district heating system, they became a little bit less reliant on outside imports of oil, natural gas, and coal, and thereby became just a little bit richer. They took that wealth, and then they invested in another energy business. And then another, and another, and another. 15 years later, this 3,000-person town created 50 new energy businesses with 1,000 new jobs and brought down their carbon footprint 95% in the process. Second example, a delicatessen in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a university town with about 100,000 people. Zingerman's was very successful for its first 10 years, and then they faced a kind of fork in the road about whether they become a chain across America, like, you might not know this name, but Schlotsky's would be another example of a deli chain. They decided against it for two reasons. One is they were afraid of losing quality control, which was very important to them. And as Paul Saginaw, one of the founders of Zingerman, says, the last thing I want to do in my declining years of life is fly around the country visiting second-rate versions of myself. The other issue was, why do they like coming to work? It's the people, it's the relationships. And if they start kind of becoming a national company, they'll lose those relationships and the joy of what they do. But they still wanted to grow. How do you grow and stay local? And they decided rather than growing wide, they would grow deep. So they looked at things coming into the deli, the kind of inputs in the business. They said, well, we have bread, we could create our own bakery. We have coffee, we could create our own coffee roasting company. We have ice cream and cheese, we could create our own creamery. And then they looked at things coming out of the deli and thought of new value-added industries they could do out of that. So, for example, we not only have good deli food, we could serve restaurant sit-down food. We could create a coffee cake mail order company. We could create a training module for good customer service called ZingTrain. So in all, Zingerman's is now 9 independently owned businesses. There are different partnerships running each of them, and the partners meet together once a week to sort of discuss the quality of the licensing. Zingerman's is now collectively employing 550 people in Ann Arbor, and their annual sales are more than $40 million. One of the things that I think is interesting about Zingerman's is that mainstream economic development would have pronounced it impossible. That is, in mainstream economic development, it's all about clusters. And so, you know, if you're a university town like Ann Arbor and you have a good medical center, you have a bio cluster, and we're going to build off that. Well, they had no cluster of food activity. They had nothing going on with food. They built a cluster from scratch. And that is largely what local economic development is all about. It's building clusters from scratch in each and every sector in our economy in order to become self-reliant and wealthy. Rule number 3, spreading triple bottom line businesses. Now, I know that across Australia, just as true across the United States, many communities have wildly different views about what constitutes the right level of labor rights, the right level of environmental protection. But here's where I know there is absolute consensus. If you go to a community and say, look, would you rather be a full employment community with good wages and high environmental standards? Or would you rather be a full employment community with low wages and low environmental standards? You will get a uniform answer back. And it's only because some of us wrongly believe there's a trade-off between good labor and environmental standards and a bottom line that we play these things against one another. And the only way that we can make sure that our economy moves in this direction, in my view, is we identify all of those businesses in our community that are in fact performing well in both their bottom line and labor and environmental standards. We share those best practices, we spread them, we celebrate them. Now, I've been on the bully pulpit doing talks like this for about 15 years, often debating economic developers. And increasingly, they have kind of accepted most of the arguments I've just given to you, but they come back with another argument, and they say, okay, we accept that if you have two apples, a local apple and a non-local apple, you're right, Shuman, consuming that local apple will bring you all of these economic development benefits and the smart growth and the tourism and the entrepreneurship, but these apples are never the same. This local apple will always cost more money because local is more expensive. Bigger is better. Bigger box is cheaper. Bigger businesses achieve better economies of scale. So my last book, Small Mart Revolution, really focused on debunking that argument. I just want to share one or two thoughts with you. If it were true that across the board local businesses have become less competitive over the last 20 years, we would see more jobs, a higher proportion of jobs going into the large business sector of the economy, and fewer jobs in the smaller business sector of the economy. But this is the record for the United States, and it goes from 1990 to 2009. The red stuff at the top represents the percentage of jobs in large businesses, and then this is small businesses, and then the middle swath is medium-scale businesses. And I think you could say both medium and small are 99.9% locally owned. If you took out a magnifying glass, you would find that, yes, indeed, the large business sector has gotten 2% more of the jobs. 2%! That's all globalization has done, 2%. Now, by the way, this same trend is true in Australia, except your swath of large business is not almost 50%, it's about 30%. So 70% of your economy is locally owned business, small or medium scale. One thing, this is jobs. Jobs. It doesn't count home-based businesses. And if you add the explosive growth of home-based businesses in the United States, about 10 million in the last decade, those trends actually don't even show a 2% shift. In fact, the local business percentage of the economy has grown. All of this in an environment where economic development was tilted like a double diamond ski slope against local small business, because all of their subsidies were going to big business. Their mission was to make local business less competitive, and they failed. Thank God they failed. What we've seen instead is that despite public policy being biased against local small business, this sector has been remarkably resilient. Imagine if we had supported these businesses, how well they would have done. Second thing, profitability. We know that sole proprietorships, which most small businesses either are or start out as, are 3 times as profitable as C corporations, which most larger businesses are, with partnerships falling in between. Now, if you think local businesses have been competitive so far, you ain't seen nothing yet. Think of it this way. 2/3 of the Australian economy, 2/3 of the American economy are services. Services are inherently local. And in all of the OECD countries, the service percentage of the economy is growing. So the local percentage of the economy will naturally grow. The place where we have sort of gone non-local is with goods. as you know, both Australia and the United States imports a lot of stuff from places like China. But an interesting thing about at least American imports, 3/4 of our trade deficit is in what are called non-durable goods. Non-durable goods are things that you consume relatively quickly, like food, paper, building materials. Here's one characteristic of non-durable goods. They tend to weigh a lot, and they tend to have relatively low value per unit weight. That means that as oil prices rise, these are the first things you're going to relocalize. So, right now, in the United States, we import a lot of bricks from China. With $500 a barrel oil, no one is going to be importing bricks from China. Just not going to make sense anymore. And if you want to understand why local food is taking off, this is one of the underlying reasons, is that the economics of global food are falling apart. How do we then take these sort of preliminary observations, these 3 principles, and how do we implement this around a local economic development program? Well, in my view, there are 6 P's that we should be focusing on. Planning, people, partners, purchasing, and policy making. Planning means identifying leaks in the economy. All of those places where we are unnecessarily importing outside goods and services, because these are places where we can and should have local businesses that are pumping up the local economic multiplier. People. How do we get a new generation of entrepreneurs to populate these leak-plugging businesses? Or how do we train workforces to work for these businesses? Partners. How can we make local businesses working together more competitive than they would be if they were working apart? An example? In Tucson, Arizona, a group of local food businesses have something they call Tucson Originals. And they collectively buy foodstuffs, kitchen equipment, dishes, and through the bulk purchasing, bring down their unit prices. Purse. How do we harness our savings? Short-term savings in banks, long-term savings in pension funds. Purchasing. How do we spearhead buy local or think local first campaigns so that local businesses do more business? Public policy. I have a very simple goal for public policy makers. Stop destroying local business. We don't need any special favors. Just simply give us a level playing field and we will do fine, thank you. Now, in the last few years, what I have found as I speak to small business groups is that the one big, really big obstacle that they face is purse, is capital. And I want you to understand why this is by doing a quick survey. So, by show of hands, how many people here do your banking at a local bank or a credit union? Okay, so I'm seeing about 2/3 of the hands up. The other third we're going to beat up after tonight's talk. Now, by show of hands here, I know we've got some students in the audience that aren't thinking a lot about their long-term investment strategy. But those of you with a super fund, how many of you are spending that super fund, investing that super fund, at least 50% on local small business? Okay, I see one hand, a kind of little bit of tentative, maybe, maybe not. Okay, this is outrageous. You should be ashamed of yourselves. We've just established that 70% of the jobs in your economy are local small business. We've established that your economic prosperity turns on supporting these businesses. We've established that these businesses are profitable and these businesses are highly competitive and becoming increasingly competitive. And yet you, the great locavores of Brisbane, are putting your money into global companies. You are systematically over-investing in global companies disconnected from community well-being, and under-investing, that is, not investing at all, in the businesses that are critical for local vitality. We have got to fix this problem. Here's the reason why we have this problem. We enacted in the United States, and you enacted in Australia, a system of what's called securities laws, and we did so in the early Jurassic period. Our securities laws make it unbelievably impractical and expensive for a local small business to take even $1 from a non-wealthy person, because we created a system of investment apartheid. If you are in the upper 1% of income and wealth, you are an accredited investor in the United States, you are a sophisticated investor in Australia, and you are allowed to invest in anything, anytime, no questions asked. If you are in the other 99%, sorry, you cannot invest even $1 unless the local business has prepared a thick document of information of disclosure. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen these disclosure documents. They maybe are 100, 200 pages long, 8-point font, often in all caps type. No human being has ever been observed to be reading these. As you go through, every page says, you will lose everything. You will lose everything. That's what disclosure is called. So, the price tag for preparing these disclosure documents can be easily $25,000, $50,000. If you do a disclosure document for a large number of people for a kind of public offering, it could be $100,000 or more. What lunatic local business wants to spend $100,000 on lawyers' bills to raise $25,000 of capital? This is why the system is all broken. Now imagine if we were to fix this system. Here's some numbers. The super funds in Australia right now are worth about $1.3 trillion. If you were to get the capital markets to work efficiently in Australia, roughly 70% of that money would go into the 70% of the economy that's small and local. So there would be about a $1 trillion shift from global companies to local companies. That means 40,000 new dollars of investment capital for every man, woman, and child in Australia in a community. That's just real money that could come in and revive your economy. Now, how do we do this? What are the tools we can use to do this? What I want to do is go through 10 quick tools that we have developed in the United States for helping the 99% of unaccredited investors put money into local small business. Tool number one, we are increasingly going to local banks and credit unions, and we are asking them to create specialized kinds of certificates of deposits, the proceeds of which are used exclusively for loans for targeted kinds of local businesses. So an example is here. Here's a company called Equal Exchange. It's a fair trade company based in Boston. They entered a deal with their local bank called Wainwright. It's since changed names to Eastern. And they created special certificates of deposit so that the people who do their savings at the bank can support fair trade. Believe it or not, $1 million worth of money has come into these CDs, giving a $1 million line of credit to Equal Exchange. I think across Australia, we should be negotiating with banks and credit unions to create these specialty kinds of deposit certificates. Number two, co-ops. Cooperatives, by and large, are not regulated in the same way with the same degree of exhaustive rigor than our private companies. And so, consequently, members of consumer cooperatives have opportunities to support local small business, to support their cooperative, to support related businesses that aren't available in other sectors. So this is a slide from Weaver Street Market in Carrboro, North Carolina. They needed to build a third supermarket store. They needed $1 million to do it. How did they get the $1 million? They borrowed it from their members. And they paid their members 5, 6, 7% per year for the privilege of borrowing that money. So co-ops actually are a form of local investment that people are practicing right now. Number three, LION. LION stands for the Local Investment Opportunities Network of Port Townsend, Washington, which was started by this guy, James Fraser, a former hedge fund manager, now guilt-ridden and trying to do good back in his hometown. LION addresses a very peculiar problem in both American securities law, but it's also true in Australian securities law. You can do all of your offering statements, but even if you do them, who can you approach? You can only approach people that you know, people you have a pre-existing relationship with. So what Fraser did is he has a party once a month in Port Townsend. He brings investors together with small business people. He serves wine and food, and they get to know each other. And at the end of each party, he has a list, a checklist of who now has a pre-existing relationship. And based on that, he circulates business plans. Since 2008, just this one little social invention has brought $3 million new dollars into local business in Port Townsend, a community of 10,000 people in the United States. This network, this idea of LION is now spreading across the United States. Number four, sponsorships. Some of you may have gone to a site called Kickstarter, and there's a bunch of sites that are out there like this. This particular offering of Kickstarter is for a brewery, Brookside Brewery, Copper Harbor's first microbrewery. You can throw in $1, $5, $1,000. If you throw in $1, you get a thank you. If you throw in $25, maybe you get a t-shirt. If you throw in $1,000, maybe you get the beer named after you. But as far as US securities regulators are concerned, the thank you note, the t-shirt, the beer name, these are not payments on your investment. So this actually does not qualify as a security. You're basically just sponsoring something. You're giving money away. Now, who in their right mind would give money to a company for nothing? Who would do this? Well, last year, Kickstarter raised $100 million for US companies, and they expect to do better business this year. Internet lending. We're starting to see these kinds of sites also spreading in Australia that have been actively engaged in the United States. They do sort of peer-to-peer lending, P2P. Kiva.org is sort of the equivalent of Muhammad Yunus in a virtual form. With Kiva, you can put $100 into a micro-entrepreneur in Bolivia. Now, you only get your principal back. And in the United States, if you don't get interest, this is not regarded as a security. Prosper.com does pay you back interest, and you can do loans to individuals or to companies, but they went through an exhaustive securities process, and so local businesses, now can access Prosper for getting capital from others. Now, the problem that I have with Kiva, with Prosper, with Kickstarter, is that all of these things don't do local investment. That is to say that every $100 that you give to a micro-entrepreneur in Bolivia is $100 unavailable for a micro-entrepreneur in Brisbane. So what we want to do is we want to create portals within these sites where local investors can find local businesses. And this is precisely what the Funding Circle, a UK-based site, does right now. It creates community-based circles, and increasingly we'll see this in the other sites as well. Number 6, pre-selling. In the United States, in most US states, if you pre-sell goods, this is not regarded as a security that's regulated. So Awaken Cafe in Oakland needed $100,000 to move to a new site. They didn't want to waste $100,000 on attorneys. So they decided to pre-sell coffee to their best customers. And the basic deal was, give us $1,000 today, and we'll give you $1,200 worth of coffee when the new store opens up. This is how they financed the move. It was brilliant. Number 7, now we start getting into the fun stuff, local stock. In the United States, we have sort of 2 layers of securities laws, a national layer and then a state layer, and of course we have 50 states. In each of these 50 states, you can issue publicly traded stock that can only be bought or sold by people living within that state. These so-called intra-state offerings are a little like a local investment. So an example of an intra-state offering is suggested by this picture here, the Merc, or the Mercantile. The Merc was built in Powell, Wyoming. Powell, Wyoming is a small mountainous community. They had no place to buy socks and underwear. So they decided they were going to build their own general store. They needed a few $100,000 to do so. Where are they going to get that money? They got volunteer legal assistance, created a small stock issue, and sold the stock door to door like Girl Scout cookies. They quickly got the money together. This thing opened up. This thing has been profitable every year for the last 10 years. There are now busloads of tourists that come into Powell, Wyoming to see the Powell Merc miracle in action. The thing about this story that's a little bit irritating is that it required volunteer legal assistance. That if they had paid for the lawyers, it still would have cost $50,000 or $100,000. Now, just to bring this back to Australia, sitting in a little bit earlier tonight for a few minutes, he's heard my rap already, so he left early, was Paul Niederer. Paul has created the Small Offerings Board in Australia. And Paul struck a deal with your regulators to make it relatively inexpensive to do small stock offerings in the country. So basically for about $8,000, $9,000 up front, and then 8–9% of the shares, of the price of shares that are then sold, small businesses can do small offerings, and up to 20 unaccredited investors can put money into these businesses. So it's been a really good step in the right direction in terms of bringing down a little bit the old costs of doing these small-scale offerings. But we need to go a lot further, because clearly the legal rules around these things, both the small stock in the United States and the small stock in Australia, are way over-constraining. Here's what started to bother me. The whole purpose of having securities laws is to protect grandma from spending her life savings on swampland she might buy from a shyster in Florida. Okay, that's the way it's constructed in the United States, protecting grandma. Now, here's what I don't understand. Grandma in the United States can go into any one of 1,000 casinos. And when grandma walks into a casino, do they say, stop, wait a minute, can you show that you are an accredited gambler? No, that question never comes up. Or do they say to grandma, listen, will you read this thick document here about all the risks of playing blackjack before you sit at the table? So we have two systems of risk management. One system called gambling, where everyone can lose everything, and probably will, independent of income. And another system called investing in local small business and preserving life as we know it. And they say, sorry, unless you pay a lawyer an unnecessary $100,000, you can't play. This did not seem right to me. So I wrote an article in a journal of the Federal Reserve in the United States, based in San Francisco. And in this journal article, I recommended, just a little bit mischievously, that we create a $100 exemption, a huge reform in securities law. You know, my thinking was that $100 was no more risky than a bad dinner for two at a new Chinese restaurant. Okay, that's how risky it was. Some friends of mine who were attorneys then wrote to the Securities and Exchange Commission a rulemaking petition for the $100 exemption. Hundreds of people wrote in letters in support. And this proposal just sat there for years. Well, a year ago, on Capitol Hill, the Government Operations Committee of the House was grilling Mary Shapiro, the head of the SEC, and one of the Congress people asked her, so whatever became of that $100 exemption proposal? And she kind of shifted uncomfortably in her seat and said, well, you know, we're going to get together a committee in the SEC in the next few months, maybe a year. We'll look at some of these reform proposals, see if there's anything to them. The committee went ballistic. We are at 9% unemployment. We have been in an economic crisis for years. And these folks are dilly-dallying and taking their time on no-brainer proposals for reform in order to get more capital into the one kind of business we know produces jobs. The committee voted unanimously, not for a $100 exemption, but for a $10,000 exemption. This then went to the Senate. The Senate sat on it for a while, but this man, Barack Obama, said, guys, get it done. They ultimately created a $2,000 exemption, and now we're working out the fine print. I took this picture sitting in the Rose Garden in April, and I'll tell you, it was a very moving experience. For 25 years, I've been associated with every imaginable losing cause in Washington. And to finally have something that won, and something that was so important, because basically, local investment in small business is now legal. It's a huge change. But this is only the beginning of the kinds of change that are needed, because it's not enough to just buy local stock. People need the ability to resell it. So we need to create local stock exchanges. These are not going to be big brick and mortar institutions like the New York Stock Exchange. These will be virtual places where people buy and sell their securities. This guy on the left, Michael Van Patten at Mission Markets, will create for a state or a locality right now a local stock exchange for $50,000 to $100,000. The first purchaser may be the state of Hawaii, which last year passed a piece of state legislation demanding that the economic development authorities in the state take very seriously the strategy of local stock and local stock markets. This guy on the right is one of a growing number of American entrepreneurs who think $100,000 is way too expensive for a stock exchange. He wants to create a kind of no-frills stock exchange in Lancaster, Pennsylvania called the LanX. His name, by the way, he's a business school professor. and his name is Trexler Profit. Now, no one should take what I'm saying here as an invitation to lose all of your life savings by investing in even your favorite local business. Because smart investors put money in a portfolio of businesses in order to diversify the risk. The problem is that the securities laws around investment companies, pools of capital, are even worse and more restrictive than those around issuing stock. So in the United States, it is true that if you're an unaccredited investor, you can put money in a mutual fund. But it costs about $500,000 to do the legal work to create a mutual fund. The other thing about mutual funds, there are 7,500 mutual funds in the United States, and not a single one of them invests in local small business. And it's not illegal, they just haven't innovated in that direction so far. So instead, if you want to invest in a pool of local businesses, the best you can do is there's a half dozen nonprofits that have these revolving loan funds in the United States. Here's one run by a guy named Steve Fireman in Columbus, Ohio. And this revolving loan fund invests in local businesses, very small stuff. We're going to need to expand that. In the meantime, what you can do is focus on self-directed IRAs or self-directed super funds. Self-directed IRAs are such a secret weapon, such a secret tool in the United States that a dummies book has been written about. But here's the thing, everything that I've just talked about, you can invest in with tax-deferred money with a self-directed IRA. You can invest in targeted CDs at your local bank. You can invest in co-ops. You can invest in Kiva and Prosper. You can invest in pre-sales. You can invest in property. You can invest in Steve Fireman's fund. The only thing you can't invest in is your own house or your kid's house. But interestingly, you can invest tax-deferred money in your neighbor's house. And your neighbor can invest in your house. And therein lies my talk for next year. The point is, though, is that we have a lot of liberty in creating our own investment funds now with self-directed IRAs and self-directed supers. It requires some work. It requires a little bit of shopping around. It will require a couple of $100s of fees to hire somebody to help you do this. But if you really want to do local investment right now, you certainly can do it. Now, are you going to lose a lot of money if you invest locally? I begin my book by trying to sober people up about the alternative. If you have a loser social life like I have, you might spend a Saturday afternoon listening to low-grade AM radio where every investment guru under the sky has a program on during the day. And they will say to you, just leave your money in Wall Street for 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, and you will get an 8% per year rate of return. No, 12%. No, actually, if it's really long-term, it'll be 20%. They just throw around these numbers casually, and they've convinced Americans that they will have a fabulous retirement if they put money into these funds. In point of fact, if you look at these 140 years of performance of Wall Street, the average rate of return in any 12-month period has been 2.6%. 2.6%. Now, I haven't done a similar kind of extensive analysis of Australian investment, but here's what I know is true. That if I had an index fund in the main exchange in Australia right now, it would be worth about the same as it was in the middle of 2007. So you guys have a problem too. We have been sold a massive bill of goods about what kinds of profits global corporations are going to deliver to us. And my belief is that if you shop carefully, you can easily find local businesses that beat 2.6%. In fact, beat 5%. Several of the examples that I gave to you, Equal Exchange and Weaver Street Markets, pay well over 5% per year. Now, what about public policy? What could Brisbane do? What could you push your city council to do in Brisbane that might move this agenda along a few inches? Well, you might ask them, hey guys, where are you doing your banking? Are you doing your banking at a local bank or credit union? If not, reconsider. How about just putting up a website of all of the Brisbane businesses and co-ops and banks that are available for local investment? Just have a passive list so people know what the options are. How about identifying people in the community who are willing to serve as custodians for these self-directed super funds? And once they're set up, then they've got this website to go to figure out how you're going to start creating a diversified local portfolio. I mean, literally, if you just did those activities, tens of millions of new dollars would come into Brisbane businesses. If you wanted to be a little bit more ambitious, you could work with Michael Van Patten or his counterpart here in Australia and create a local stock exchange. And you can start to press for reform at the national level of your securities laws, like we did in the United States. For example, you know, what Paul Nieder is doing is great, but there's no reason why only 20 unaccredited investors should be able to invest in a small stock offering. It should be 2,000 or 20,000. We should allow everyone to participate, even at a small level. What we are seeing is the precipice of the most dramatic change in where money is flowing in modern history. And I truly believe this. In the United States, we don't face the prospect of a $1 trillion shift. We actually will see the prospect of a $15 trillion shift, given our size and the magnitude of the misallocation of capital right now. What happens when the first $1 trillion moves from Wall Street to Main Street? Well, suddenly the prices of Wall Street stocks with less demand goes down. And the prices of Main Street stocks with more demand goes up. I think a lot of investors will take notice. And then the next $1 trillion will move to Main Street, and then another and another. This 15 trillion could move quite quickly. Now, where I really want to leave you is with a children's story. Because I think this story, which I also end Local Dollars, Local Cents with, is really my way of summarizing how we go about investment wrong in our society. Because so often we look for wealth thousands of kilometers away. This story is called Blue So Blue, written by Jean-Francois Dumont. And in this story, there's a kid, a boy, who loves painting the color blue. Everywhere he goes, he paints the color blue. But there's one shade of blue that comes to him in his dreams and mesmerizes him. And he's trying to figure out, where does this color of blue come from? So he goes on a trip around the world to find this shade of blue. He goes to the Louvre, looking at the great masters. Nope, can't find the blue in any of the paintings there. He goes on an ocean journey, looking for patches of water that are that shade of blue. Still can't find it. He goes to a blues bar in New Orleans. No, not going to be there. He goes to a desert, and there a blue-hooded stranger says, "What you've been looking for may never have been very far away." And then it dawns on the boy. That color of blue he was looking for, it was in his mother's eyes. And this is the story of where economic development needs to go. We need to find the wealth that we're searching worldwide for in our own backyards. Let me stop there and open it up for questions.